Hi, everybody. My name is Natalie Yeadon, and I'm one of the co-owners and managing directors with Impetus Digital. Impetus Digital builds some of the best-in-class asynchronous and synchronous virtual collaboration and communication tools for life science companies. We've helped companies to do everything from virtual advisory boards to working committees, medical education events, and corporate events, including sales training, etc. But more importantly, we believe at Impetus that everything starts with a conversation. And from these big, hairy, audacious conversations with the provocateurs, people who are doing leading edge, bleeding edge technology innovators and entrepreneurs, that we can work collectively to positively disrupt healthcare in a way we've never seen before. And so I'm really super excited to have one of these provocateurs, Dr. Roxie Mooney, at the table with us today. So happy to have you. Thank you for joining our show today.
Thank you for having me as a guest.
Awesome. So just for those who do not know Roxie Mooney, she is actually a healthcare commercialization strategist. And she's also a digital health advisor at Legacy DNA. This is her company. She earned a doctorate of business administration and a degree from the Walden University, where she explored the strategies that healthcare leaders use to commercialize new products, innovations in healthcare, so that they can all help to reach commercial success. She's also an educator, applying her vast experience to teach healthcare, marketing, and organizational leadership to MBA and master's students, respectfully. So based on Roxy's 20 years plus of business experience and practice, and 7 years of researching over 500 peer-reviewed articles and over 160 interviews with healthcare innovators, she has actually created a repeatable and really successful method that helps innovators that they can follow and use so they can maximize their product and market success. Roxy has also invented, she's the inventor of this really cool thing called the COVID Proof Your Business Pivot Kit. We're going to learn all about what this pivot kit is. And also the CoIQ, we've all heard of IQ, so the CoIQ early adoption strategy. So we're going to dig into that today. She's also a popular speaker and author of the best-selling book, How Healthcare Innovators Maximize Market Success. So welcome, Roxy. It is so awesome to have you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction.
It's so cool. And I love innovators and thinkers like yourself, and a really interesting background. You've done all kinds of things, anything that you can imagine, you've actually done. So I think for a lot of people listening, I think we'd be very interested to find out what brought you to where you are today. How did you spark the interest in doing things like healthcare commercialization and innovation?
Yeah. So I started Legacy DNA a little over 10 years ago as a healthcare marketing agency. And just a few years in, I decided to go back to school and get my doctorate in business. I really had no idea what that journey was going to look like. I just knew that I wanted to further my education. And one of the first things they ask is, what is the business problem that you want to be married to for the next 5 to 7 years of your life? Because you're eating, sleeping, and drinking with this thing for a long time. And for me, I had worked with a number of early stage healthcare startups. So I saw that we were on this precipice of this explosion of innovation in healthcare. And this is the early 2000s, before the Affordable Care Act had even come about. But I'd come across this alarming statistic that 95% of innovations that are brought to market fail to reach any adequate level of customer adoption or financial ROI. And frankly, that just really stopped me in my tracks, right? Because, for years we've heard this looming increase in the cost of healthcare. And so you think the solution is going to be all of these innovators coming up with these new ideas. So this statistic was very alarming to me, that majority of the innovations that people brought to market wouldn't get into the hands of the people that needed them the most. And so it really kind of started to keep me up at night thinking about, if we're talking about other industries, it's kind of like, okay, who cares if, iPhone 12 comes out, but we're talking about healthcare where lives are at stake and quality of life is at stake. And it's really personal. It could be your family, could be my family, or even ourselves. And, God forbid, the only reason why we don't have access to that is because that innovator didn't have the commercialization expertise to make it successful. So that's kind of my story. And kind of at that point, I said, I'm going to figure out what strategies and tactics innovators need, whether they're in a big company or a small company, to make sure that they're beating the odds.
I love it. And how visionary of you to have started in healthcare before it really just blew up. Of course, what has happened with the COVID-19 pandemic has been nothing short of an atrocity. But certainly there's people who are optimists who saw that as a bit of an accelerant for digital change. And so I was just curious about when you talk about digital innovators or companies who are trying to break into the healthcare space, who is specifically the target group that you work with? Are these like more consumer electronic type of companies? Are these people, are they life science companies? Tell us a little bit about who you target specifically of working with.
Yeah, so it really varies. So you have clinicians and you have physicians who have been immersed in the world of healthcare and have witnessed many problems that they've had to live with for a long time, that they've decided they've got an idea and a way that they want to help solve it and contribute to, improving care for everyone. And so sometimes we're working with those folks. Sometimes it's just an entrepreneur that maybe doesn't have a healthcare background, but they are really good at building, launching, and scaling, and eventually exiting successfully healthcare companies. And then sometimes it's other companies that have been in business for a long time, but they're maybe thinking about setting up a separate business unit to innovate and to kind of keep the to keep the company growing and scaling for what's next in the industry. And so it really could be the gamut.
Absolutely. Now, let's actually talk a little bit about this CoIQ, and I'm assuming it's commercialization optimization, or what does the CoIQ? I'm probably completely off on that, but it's such a cool acronym, and I love the fact that you trademarked it. But and so I want to just focus on this was prior to COVID. This is about finding out what your IQ is, wanting to understand what that early adoption strategy concept is, and what you built around that.
Yep. So I have a pretty nerdy response for you. So COI is commercialization of innovation, and it's the conceptual framework that I used in my doctoral study. And so the idea is I kind of melded those two together, thinking that if I could work towards helping to elevate everyone's intelligence or understanding around these strategies and tactics that are required for success, then I would be kind of doing my part to move the needle. And so I was able to take all of those learnings, both in my business experience, but also with the academic journey, and meld that in together into these strategic products or frameworks, a systematized, repeatable process that innovators would be able to follow to, circumvent failure and make sure they're on their path to profit.
So we're looking at these companies. I know, again, healthcare has kind of exploded and there's been this laser focus. I have never seen so much sort of layperson understanding of science that I've seen since the COVID-19 pandemic. These days, newscasts are talking about mechanisms of action. They're talking about labels like efficacy. I wouldn't be surprised if everybody goes to medical school after this. So really interesting at seeing of how healthcare has almost become democratized or part of the TikTok culture. And so with that, there's probably a lot of companies that are looking at jumping into the healthcare space. We've seen telehealth as an example has just exploded, and other things. So let's actually go through each of the steps of the CoIQ system. And one of the very first steps has to do with considering timing. Mm-hmm. So let's actually just take a case study example of a company that wants to come into healthcare. They've got something really innovative that fits in during this COVID-19, uprising. What would you tell this company around the ideas around appropriate timing?
Yeah. So unfortunately, the timing that most folks go to market is a little bit more aligned without strategic thinking, but more of whenever it's ready. That's when we launch. When it's ready, we go without really thinking about the landscape that they are playing in, right? And thinking about, are they going to be first to market? Are they going to be a fast follower? Are they going to be a late entrant? And what are the strategic implications for each one of those moves? And so what happens is when there's a lack of awareness about that consideration, there's so many missed opportunities. So I'll give you an example. A lot of times we think if you're first to market, that's the winning strategy, and it really isn't necessarily. So a lot of times if you're coming in as a second entrant or maybe even a latter entrant, you're able to, there's much higher cost associated with whoever is going into the market first, right? They're creating the brand, creating the awareness, creating the demand. And then what happens is if you are coming in after the fact, you're able to assess the market and see where the gaps are. A lot of times they are so heavily invested in their initial strategy or product solution that it's really hard for them to rewind some of the mistakes that they made. So it's easy to go in and go, okay, let's assess the landscape. Let's see where that fast follower failed and what the target audience is saying that they still want and need. And then coming into the market and really shaping your solution to be based upon that gap in the market. And so really, I always suggest that you just start off with thinking about the timing and not just defaulting to, oh, it's ready, so let's launch tomorrow, without the strategic implications for that.
So it really is important to be able to dig in and understand that marketplace. So concepts like market research and just being able to find the right resources in the public domain to understand what that landscape looks like. So the next piece of the CoIQ adoption strategy really focuses on appropriate targeting. So I'm assuming that actually is talking about the ideal client avatar, what that looks like, what that feels like. Give us a bit of an explanation about how you help companies strategize around appropriate targeting.
Yeah, so this is another one of those things that is just there's so much opportunity when we kind of have some of these insights that I've been able to learn over time. Is most of the time when we're doing a targeting strategy, we know that in healthcare it's a really complicated buying stakeholders, right? You know, the payer is not necessarily the user and or who the referrer is, and so forth. But a lot of times when we are evaluating our targeting strategy, we're like, okay, well, am I going to sell direct to a consumer, or am I going to, sell to the physician and expect them to refer? Or am I going to sell to the hospital system and kind of go that path? And really what I try to educate on the targeting strategy is, yes, those things and that analysis is important, but go deeper, go further, and figure out who the early adopters are. So understanding the diffusion of innovation curve and how in any market, whether it's healthcare, whether no matter what subsector it is in healthcare, understanding that the first two slivers of any market, it's about 16% of the market, represents early adopters. And those people have very distinct buying characteristics and traits. And so your entire strategy will be off track if you're not identifying who those early adopters are, and you're not messaging and positioning and branding around what's going to be most important to those early adopters. So I'll give you an example. The mainstream market, they don't want anything new. They don't want to be the first to try anything. And we kind of think of healthcare in general as kind of like more of that kind of characteristic, right? They're the ones that are laggards, right? In general. But we're seeing that, as you described, we're seeing that change and shift. And so when you're going out to the market first, you don't want to spend time and waste your precious resources trying to convince the mainstream market that they need to try something new. It isn't going to work. You're going to actually just end up going belly up in your company, because you're going to spend millions of dollars trying to having a mismatch between your market and your product. When you think about the early adopters and you kind of put that lens on, I kind of almost try to describe it as putting on glasses, that then you're like, okay, I need to make sure that I'm finding the people that are the early adopters. These are the people that want to be the first. They want to be the ones that are trying something new, and their intention is to catapult the competition, right? And so you're going with a different messaging to them, and they're not looking for you to have it all figured out, right? So you in healthcare, you can't have anything that's going to be dangerous to patients or dangerous to anyone, right? Um, when we talk about minimal viable product. So it needs to be safe, right? And it needs to be effective. But at the same time, their expectations of getting first access to a solution is going to be very different than what the mainstream market is going to be looking for.
So let's just say, for example, there's a company that's brand new, some really smart people in the organization and the senior leadership. They've got some really new, cool software as a medical device concept,
Yep.
and they know nothing about the healthcare space. How are they starting to find these early adopters? What sort of recommendations do you use to explain and explore how to find early adopters?
Yeah, so you're looking for, and these are generally situational triggers, right? So these are not where you're going to go on LinkedIn and you're going to be able to go in Sales Navigator and create a filter, and then be able to create that target list. These are situational triggers. You're looking for the ones that are pushing the envelope, that are progressive, that are leading the way. And a lot of times you can find that out. Kaiser Permanente, Geisinger. You know the brands that are leading the way, that are going to be more attracted and more open to those types of innovative solutions. So it's coming up with a list of questions, having those conversations, and figuring out who they are, and really disqualifying someone is just as important as qualifying someone, right? So when I'm having a conversation with someone, or a client's having a conversation with them, you want to know as quickly as possible if they're part of the mainstream market or a laggard, because they might waste your time for 2 years and you're thinking that eventually that's going to close, especially when healthcare has such long sales cycles. We're accustomed to things maybe taking 12 or 18 months. Well, you could be spending 12 or 18 months with someone that's just stringing you along, that's never going to buy until you got a stack of clinical evidence and you've got a whole full roster of paying clients, and that's not who you want to target in the beginning. You'll end up losing your company before you ever get positive cash flow.
Such great words of wisdom there. And so it's sometimes so easy to get lost in track from focus and being much more in a subtractive mode than in an additive mode. But I think it absolutely makes total sense. So the next piece to the CoIQ early adoption strategy is really around procedures and optimizations around communication. So now that we've kind of isolated who these particular client avatars, especially at the onset, which is these early adopters, what do they look like? What do they feel like? Where do they hang out? How do I ask the right questions? Now that we've isolated them, what are we saying to them? Why is that message different than the one that will eventually be captured with, once you have a greater audience and then you're going to the mainstream? What is going to be very particular about those early adopter messages and positioning?
Yeah. So we touched on this a little bit around like new, never been done before, right? That's going to be the messaging that you want. One of the pitfalls that I see very often from a communication or branding standpoint is it's changing in the industry, and we're making a lot of inroads and progress, but you will see someone when they are verbally explaining how innovative their solution is and how revolutionary, never been done before. And then you go to their website or you look at their pitch deck, and it looks like the same stale, boring, tried, true, blue and gray, smiling nurse stock images. And there's such a disconnect. And it's saying, oh, you're saying that you're a pioneer, that you're revolutionary, but everything else that you're presenting to me just looks like corporate blandness and me too. And so how are you going to really build that trust and credibility with that audience if there's a disconnect? And that's definitely one of the primary pitfalls around communication and messaging and branding that I see.
Communication is there's both opportunity and the potential challenge. Now that we're living in this new normal, in the post, COVID-19, as we're all anxiously waiting for our vaccines, communication has been taken over away from the in-person touch and feel, getting to know somebody. We've heard this a lot with investors and wanting to get to know companies before they invest, and on it goes. It's a
Right.
very different world there. But it also relates in terms of developing those relationships with these new potential prospects and clients and people that you're trying to build a company with. Is what kinds of advice do you give on building trustability and credibility and gravitas when in fact we're only dealing with digital avatars, like these
Yeah.
faces on a frame? So how have you given advice to be able to do that properly?
You mean like us right now? So video is powerful. Video has been leveraged by brands outside of healthcare for a really long time now. But you're seeing healthcare embrace the tool of video in a much more powerful way since COVID. And I'm surprised at how many times, so I create video like it's my job, because it is. And I'm pushing it out on LinkedIn all the time. And I am surprised on how many people will book a call with me and they get on the phone with me, they get on the video Zoom, and it's like they know me. Like feel like they have built so much rapport with me through my video content, and I have no idea who they are. So video is really, really important. You would be surprised on how powerful you can establish a relationship and build trust. You talked about the gravitas, right? So I'm not talking about videos where you're the hero of the story and you're just talking about how awesome you are and you're talking about your service model or what you have to offer. I'm talking about video content that is delivering value, right? So all of the video content that I suggest for our clients is, what questions are your target market asking? Create videos, 3 steps, 5 steps. Here's something that you don't know. Make their life easier and better with your video content. That is an incredible way to build trust, to build credibility, and to build goodwill, right? We want to, when people do things for us, we want to do things for people, and we do business with people that we know, like, and trust. And the best way for you to get people to know, like, and trust you in today's world is to develop video content where you're providing value to someone in a relationship.
And in this digital world, and I have to completely agree, I mean, this is really the premise or the MO behind Impetus Digital, is that we build relationships virtually,
Yeah.
asynchronously and synchronously, but we do this longitudinally because trust takes time and requires multiple touch points. And that's what we actually do in our portal. So completely agree that relationships can be created virtually over time and done consistently.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that I think is interesting is we think about these early adopters and just kind of want to backtrack a little bit on, we're talking about target audiences and the ideal client avatar, especially as it relates to early adopters. Sometimes we can make the mistake of idealizing these what we call thought leaders and assuming that they're necessarily the best and the most important people that we need to have in our camp. One of the things that's interesting in this digital world is there's new cropping of important people called digital thought leaders. Can you share with the audience here about what you see as being potentially the disparity? They may be the same people, but maybe not. What have you noticed as being the difference between the traditional, in-person meeting type of thought leader versus these new digital thought leaders that perhaps nobody knows who they are?
Yeah, the way I would describe that is a micro influencer, right? So it's not necessarily about them having, 10,000 or 100,000 or even a million followers or fans, but it's more about being able to have trust and credibility within a smaller audience. And I think that we'll find that there's people like yourself that have been leading the way and doing this even before COVID was taking place, right? This is not necessarily something that we're doing just because of COVID, but it's something about our DNA and who we believe and how we're going to engage with the world. And I think that, you might have the best keynote speaker at the Oomty Oomp conference, last year, and they might not transition so well in a virtual media. And then you can have other people that come alive behind a video camera and really can engage thousands and hundreds of thousands of people in a really unique way that maybe they couldn't on stage in person at a keynote. So I think staying open-minded in really creating the mix. I mean, it's great to have someone that it has a big name. One of the things that I find interesting in healthcare with when we're talking about influencers is there's sometimes people that are like the big names, especially in healthcare, where they might be, but they might be real traditional. And so they might have a social media account, but they might not be doing a whole lot with it. And so they might have a really big brand behind their name, but they might not be the best influencer when it comes to like spreading the word or pushing out and spreading the word and kind of pushing out that new media that maybe you creating with them.
Yeah, so it's really a great point, Roxy, that one has to really do their due diligence on these digital thought leaders or these thought leaders in general. And looking at it's not just the contact point, it's the amplification opportunity
Right.
afterwards. And so it's like a chess game. It's always being aware 6 steps ahead of where you are today. Now, I think it's really interesting is that the fourth step in the CoIQ early adoption strategy is actually product, or the idea of co-creating with your target audience the product. The reason I say that that's interesting is that I think in the traditional way that we've done things is product was the first step. We developed a product, and then we actually determined who was the audience, who we're going to, and then we just launched it. So tell us a little bit about why product is the fourth step. It's almost the last step in the whole process, and what is going to be required, especially around that we hear this word, it's kind of a buzzword, but this co-creation process. Tell us a little bit about how you explain this to your clients.
Yeah. So the entire process is very iterative. Everything is connected in some form or fashion. So when you're starting out, it's not like you pick the timing strategy and then you go, okay, I'm done with that. And then you move on to the next one, right? These aren't like siloed decisions that you're making. You're making the decision, making another decision and going, okay, how does that impact the one that I made? Ooh, do I need to change and tweak something? So you're just continuing to kind of finesse this emergent strategy. In the product co-creation, again, this is another one of those strategies have been deployed and deployed really well in other industries for a long time. And we're just kind of starting to scratch the surface in healthcare. The viewers might be surprised to know that over 70% of the ideas that Starbucks has brought to market has not come from their internal innovation team or R&D team. It has come from their target customers. And so you see some of these brands that are really highly advanced in the co-creation process. It's not something that they do static at this one moment in time. I'm going to conduct a survey or a focus group. And it's not on just looking for product validation. So this is a big difference in what I'm guiding and leading our clients to go through. I call it the 5 Co's. And so what typically happens is I build a technology first because I go with my experience and my intuition, and I just know that this is what the market needs. I don't need to ask them. I just build it. And I've been guilty of that myself. I'll admit it, because you just get so excited and you're so passionate about solving this problem and you just think you see so clearly. But that's what typically happens. You build the technology, just like you said, and then you go out into the marketplace and you're like, it's great, isn't it? Yeah, right. It's awesome. And so it's confirmation bias. You're just looking for someone to agree with you. My brother loved it. My cousin, and I'm not even making this stuff up. Like I literally heard this and hear this on a regular basis. Well, I asked my cousin's brother and they loved it. So I knew I was on to something. Oh, good God, right? That's not necessarily market validation. Or I'm asking people that I think that I'm safe with, right? Because my ego is tied to the product that I'm building. And so I'm asking people that are not going to tell me that my baby is ugly. What I'm coaching through is that you want to start early and you want to do this often. It's not something that's a one and done. It becomes part of the culture. Like within the organization, whether it's a small company or a large company, you have a co-creation culture and you kind of set your ego aside and you say, we don't have to be the ones that come up with all the ideas. In fact, when our target customers come up with ideas, they help us reduce our R&D cost. They help us increases our chances of success and product market fit because they're telling us what they want, right? And so we start off with the co-ideation, where literally you're sitting down and you're saying, okay, here's a problem that I identified. Is this a problem for you? How do you think we can solve it? You're not coming to them later with a solution that you've already built and invested time and money and probably part of your soul into. What happens is when we go that route, we're so invested in that when we get negative feedback, oh, I don't need those 3 features. Well, I already built them, so I'm going to go to market with it. We have a tendency to just kind of ignore that feedback, so because we're so invested in the path that we're on. So bringing those folks in earlier, there's opportunities to create these digital outlets, so that way we've got a continuous flow of input instead of, like I said, this one-time focus group or digital surveys. So co-ideation, co-evaluation. Okay, so now we've got all these ideas. These are the 10 products we could build, or the 10 configurations. Target customer, patients, physicians, nurses. What do you want first? What do you want now? That co-evaluation, and then the development of the product itself, and then really going beyond that, where so you see a lot of with co-design and co-testing, but I even say in this 5th co is co-launch, right? So we don't really, I totally value marketing teams. But as a marketer, we don't have to come up with the greatest slogan, the greatest product name. What's the value proposition of this? We just ask our target customers, what's most important to you? What's most in value to you? So they become part of that launch process as well. And then we kind of start over, right? Because we don't just innovate once and done. So we just continue through that 5 phase cycle continuously over and over. And it also helps with pre-sales. So I encourage clients, like your first early adopters and buyers are very likely going to be some of those people that participate in that co-creation process. So what better way to validate that someone loves your solution and loves it enough to actually buy it than to include that in part of the co-creation process.
Your process overlays on the Impetus platform so nicely in terms of the execution piece of it. We call those longitudinal expert engagement plans, or LEAPs. Yep. And so this iterative constant evaluation and is exactly what we do around advisory boards, and that consultation longitudinally over time and sustained over time. So we call those building authentic relationships. And so it's super cool. Is it super
we have to
cool
talk more, right?
I love it. So there you go. But really neat. And I totally agree with you. And it's just, the problem a lot of times is it's difficult. Everybody does look at things from a sequence standpoint, as opposed to looking at things from a systems or an innovation systems thinking, where you're looking at this continual agile process. We've done this a lot in product development, but it's really different in some of these bigger, large, less nimble companies that have heavy infrastructure and legacy dynamics to be able to pivot and change the mindset and the way it's actually establishes novelty and innovation. Yeah. So it really brings us to the question around, how do we get there through lowering or reducing the barriers to entry or to innovation and development and ideation by creating a lot of pilots, making people feel safe, that it's fast to get in and super easy to get out. So tell us a little bit about how people can experiment.
Yeah, so the pilot is really important, especially in healthcare, right? Because we're looking for that safety and that efficacy, that proven safety and efficacy right out of the gate. One of the things that I encourage, very similar to what we were just talking about, is when you're negotiating your pilot agreement, don't put all of the power in the target customer, right? Or the pilot partner, come to that table with kind of an equal mindset, and negotiate sales up front. So I think that this is a huge missed opportunity. Sometimes we get so excited that Oomp hospital system said that they'll do a pilot with us, because when we tell everybody that they did a pilot with us, man, our company's going to soar. Well, that's not necessarily the case. And they end up leaving a lot of opportunity and sometimes mega bucks on the table So when you're talking to this hospital system and you're negotiating this pilot terms, one, be transparent about where you are. You'd be surprised on how many times they're saying, like, look, you don't have to have it all figured out. Let's figure it out together, but let's make this agreement a win-win solution. And if A, B, and C happen in this pilot, how many are you buying? How many are you implementing? And I don't wait until it's over before I negotiate those sales terms. I make that part of the pilot agreement right up front. And of course, having a champion. So, in any setting, people are mostly worried about their core business. So even if they've said yes to a pilot, you need to make sure that you are babysitting that relationship from the very beginning, and that you have a champion inside and you have an advocate that's external, and you're continuing to move it, because you'll have people say yes to your pilot and it won't go anywhere. It never gets off the ground. Oh, we couldn't get people to participate. So in order to really make that pilot strategy a success, really working through all of those details are really important to do that up front.
I love it. We obviously talked a lot about COVID-19, and the world is changed forever.
Yes, it is.
Hopefully we won't have to wear masks forever, but you never know.
Yep.
But really the idea around the pilots, the co-creation, patients have now become the center of the universe. They always have, but I think in a very, very strong way than ever before. Everything from clinical trials, development, protocol amendments, patient-reported outcomes, and using their sensors, their wearables, all kinds of other things are at the center of all of these discussions. And part of this are these like digital biomarkers and everything in between. So tell us a little bit about what you talk about around patient centricity, utilizing patients in a way that we've never seen before, and incorporating these potential payment and reimbursement new revenue streams for companies, being able to cater to some of these new metrics around patient optimization outcomes, looking at more preventative measures and being able to measure those. So tell us a little bit about patient co-creation, working with companies, and showing that there's an incentive to co-create with patients.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you brought that up, because it's such a good point. Sometimes, if we might be open to the idea of co-creating with stakeholders, we might overlook patients very easily, thinking that it's complex. Oh, I'm talking about this rare disease in oncology, and so where am I going to find those places? There are platforms and tools to be able to find that specific patient population that you're wanting to co-create with. And you'd be surprised at how many are so, well, maybe you won't be surprised at how many are so passionate about changing life, not only for themselves, but for their peers, right? The people that are suffering from this disease as well as them. And they are eager to contribute. They're I've never had a situation where a client involved a patient and did not learn something major, something that was really game changing for the way the business was planning to commercialize their solution. So there's a lot of questions that have to be asked. How are they compensated is very critical. We need to compensate those patients that to participate just like we would anyone else. We don't want to take advantage of them. They have valuable input. Talk about co-launch, right? So a lot of these patients are advocates, and they've built their own Twitter network or their own LinkedIn or Facebook. And so when you think about going to market for this specific patient population, what better way to establish immediate trust and credibility than to have those patients that already have that trust and credibility established, that you can just come in and immediately leverage. And if they're involved in co-creating the solution, they're raving fans right out of the gate. I mean, who doesn't love what they've been able to contribute building? So the patient co-creation is really, really powerful. And there's a lot of nuances and a lot of things to think through, but believe me, it's worth it. And some of the things that I hear is, besides I already have all the answers, is that it's going to take too long. Like, I don't have time to ask them what they want. Like, I'm going to launch in 30 days. Well, it's better to delay months if not even years, and I'm not suggesting years, but I mean, it's better to delay and do it right and actually have product market fit and a viable business and a viable path to profit than it is to have something out in 30, 60 days that nobody wants to buy. And unfortunately, the number one reason why people fail to commercialize an innovation and end up in the zombie graveyard, like I call it, is because there's no need for their solution. They cannot, there's no need for their solution, and they cannot accomplish product market fit. And so that taking the time to do it right, like anything in life, is better than moving fast, moving furious, and not having something that people want to buy.
There's been a lot of companies that unfortunately have been incredibly challenged. There's a lot of companies that have done extremely well. We call those the stay-at-home companies.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Impetus is one of those companies. A lot of companies have been racing to virtualize their meetings, and that's really what we do. But there's been a lot of loss. We talk a lot about the service industry and entertainment and all sorts of other things, but there's amidst others. So this is an opportunity that you call about pivoting and using the pivot lens.
Yeah.
What kinds of advice do you talk about when you do sort of an inventory of everything from finance to operations to your market strategy and on and on? What are some of the key nuggets or pearls of wisdom that you would share to a company that's trying to pivot during this really vulnerable period?
Yeah. So the first thing is being really honest with yourself on whether you have a pivot opportunity or whether you really just need to close the doors. And the sooner that you can be honest about that with yourself as well as with your employees, the better off it's going to be for everyone. Even though it's a very painful decision, making that decision is better to do it sooner than later if there really is no pivot opportunity. And then not just doing like a knee-jerk reaction. I'm sure we can all think of companies in the last 6 to 9 months that immediately changed whatever business model they had in place and became a PPE provider overnight. It was like the gold rush to selling PPE. And so, some people that makes sense. They might have relationships there that might have been part of where their core business was to begin with. But for a lot of people, it's not a smart business strategy just to jump out and become a PPE company because that's what everybody else is doing. So when we're working with clients, we kind of have, like you said, this pivot lens, and we sit down and we map out the current strategy. You'll be surprised at how many people don't really even know what their current strategy is, because it's evolved and melded into so many different things. So that in itself is proven to be pretty beneficial. And then what we do is we take them through a process of answering these questions, and we come up with 3 different pivot paths, right? Because if we are considering a pivot, there's typically a lot of directions that we could go. But how do we strategically and intelligently analyze which is going to be the best path? And it may be the most profitable, it may be the most viable, it may be a relationship that we have. So there's a lot of variables in place, but this pivot builder and pivot kit helps take leaders and teams through this process. And you also might have, speaking of teams, you might have a couple of your key players on the team that want to go in a different direction than the CEO of the company. And so this is almost like a neutral tool, an unbiased framework to take you through that process, to be able to wrestle with those different choices that you have to make, and then figure out what's going to be that pivot path for you. And then of course, testing that into the marketplace, and proving some validity to the new path before you just go full blown, full throttle with it.
And that's so well said. And there's a lot of opportunity. And I'm sure a lot of companies are still struggling with that. And there is hope and there is opportunity. But one of the things that I think that you also really effectively share with companies, both ones that are pivoting and ones that have been really successful, is making sure that they're already aware ahead of the time of potential areas of risk. And one of those particular areas of risk is what you call effectively the valley of death.
Yeah.
Can you explain to the audience what you deem to be the valley of death When do companies need to be aware? What are the signs of that? And how do they overcome that challenge of the valley of death?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the valley of death is when we've fully invested or invested in a lot of the wrong strategies, and a lot of a lot of the wrong decisions, and we are stuck there. We are unwilling to admit that we're down the wrong path, and we kind of just get very, in when you're an entrepreneur, it's so exciting, right? You've got that immediate passion, that sense of resilience, that sense of determination, and I'm going to change the world, right? I'm going to change the world tomorrow. But as you go out into the marketplace and you have trouble raising money, and everybody keeps telling you that you're crazy and this is a terrible idea, and you pitch it and they say yes but they don't buy, right? All of the different obstacles that we're all familiar with comes with starting something from nothing, or trying to launch an innovation, especially if you're doing something that's a disruptive innovation and you're talking about something that no one's ever heard of before or done before. And so it's just really easy to kind of get so discouraged that you just kind of get stuck in what we call this valley of death, and really can use a thinking partner that's going to encourage you, that's going to help you see the things that you don't already see, to help you figure out what's your path forward.
So well said. And sometimes it's so important to get out of your head, because we can so fall in love. You mentioned the earlier confirmation bias, always looking for people to make you right because we don't want to get into cognitive dissonance or ever to feel like we're wrong. So that is such an important area of being able to suspend that feeling and be able to march on and know that there's other options.
So let me
You
give
also,
you an example before we go into that, because I think this is just so ripe for what we're talking about and what you just mentioned. So the COVID pivot kit. So because I host a video and podcast show like you, I was able to see that the conversations was changing really quickly in early March. And I immediately thought, oh my goodness, we need a COVID proof your business pivot kit for people, because they're going to have a lot of, oh crap moments, right? And so we immediately went to building it, and we built the entire pivot kit in 3 weeks, record breaking time. And the team did an incredible job with the quality of this kit. And about, I don't know, maybe 60 days after we launched it, I was talking to my business advisor, and they asked me, did I co-create with my target audience on my pivot kit? And I was like, no, like I knew that everyone needed this. And oh my goodness, like talk about a mirror. So everything that I preach against or preach for, I was not practicing myself, right? So egg on my face, but it's just a testimony of how hard it is when you're in it to relinquish your ideas, that you just feel like it's just a given that this is what people need and I'm going to build it. And how much, I mean, I think the pivot kit is phenomenal, but how much better could it have been had I gone through my own 5 goes process with building the darn kit?
So interesting, isn't it's brilliant, and we all fall into that. We fall in love with our own ideas and our own narratives. So it's an important area to discern for ourselves. You also mentioned another interesting area for companies that they can fall into, and you call this the pilot purgatory. Tell us a little bit about what this is and how do we watch out for it?
Yeah. So pilot purgatory is kind of like I was talking about earlier, where you've got this big brand company that says yes to doing a pilot, and they're taking some of your time and attention and probably some of your money. And now you've got this other one, and you've got, let's say, maybe 2 or 3 pilots going on. And again, you are extremely excited because you think that this is your path to success. But what happens is that very often you get stuck in pilot purgatory. Well, now, and I'm just going to use John Hopkins as an example, and this is not a true case, I'm making this up, just disclaimer for all your viewers here. John Hopkins says yes. So you're working with them on this pilot. And now all of a sudden, instead of building and growing your business and kind of figuring out what's next for the company, you've got all your time and attention to John Hopkins Health System because it's John Hopkins Health System, right? And now they're like, well, I like what you've got here, but if you just added these 4 features, then we would want it. Okay, so now you're spending and of course they're not paying for it, right? Because this is a pilot. So now you're going to your R&D team, your IT team, and you're building out those 4 features that they said that they want. And you end up pleasing that that pilot customer, or trying to please them, and you get stuck in pilot purgatory with no sales, no cash flow coming in, a lot of false promises. And I don't want to be a negative Nancy here, because there can be some extremely successful pilots, no doubt about it, but these are just minefields to be aware of. And you don't want to have a very successful pilot where this hospital system says yes, but now they've completely taken over the development of your solution to where it works for John Hopkins Hospital, but it doesn't work for anybody else. So now all of a sudden you've built one solution for one customer instead of an entire commercially viable business. And because you were in it and you got so excited about this pilot brand that said yes, that you didn't realize it until it was too late.
Yeah, and it is so important. And honestly, anybody who's an entrepreneur, many of us have fallen into that trap. And it
Yes.
is so important because it's literally moving yourself the 40,000 foot view analysis of what we call the opportunity cost
Yeah.
of working in the pilot purgatory that you've talked so nicely about. Just in the last few minutes, I also wanted you to talk a little bit about the last key area of challenge that we can sometimes find ourselves as entrepreneurs, is this trough of sorrow. How do we prevent ourselves from ever hitting that?
Yeah. So I say that surround ourselves with people that, yes, will tell us our baby is ugly, but also support us and believe in us. I think that that is so mission critical. You think about common examples that we're all really familiar with, like Airbnb and Uber, right? That were doing something that was extremely disruptive and revolutionary, going to change the world. And how many times did they pitch to investors 100 no's before they ever got a yes? And so surrounding yourself with people that say, I believe in you, and keep going. And then business advisors, no matter how savvy you are in business, no matter how many successful companies you've built, no matter how many successful exits you've had, everyone needs external advisors that they're working with, because you just see things differently when you're outside of the company than when you're in it. And so and then also it's interesting, there's a certain amount of unrealistic optimism that fuels entrepreneurs, right? It's the crazy part to think that you can change the world that keeps us going. And that part is really needed in order to survive this very arduous journey of innovating in any industry, much less healthcare.
It is an astounding story. Honestly, there's so many great little nuggets here. And even, just being able to explore the idea eventually of partnerships between small companies and large companies. In the end of the day, there's an opportunity for growth, for scaling, for innovation, for sharing. And I'm very excited, and I'm sure you are, about what this new ecosystem is going to look like in healthcare. Now that we've seen this explosion and this disruption and this focus by the general public on what all the first of all, the uncertainties, but what all the opportunities are. So this is a very exciting time in healthcare. So good on you, Roxy, for all the great work that you're doing, helping a lot of small businesses, companies, entrepreneurs, and large companies alike. So for those of you who are interested, we are going to be leaving in the show notes here links to contact Dr. Roxie Mooney in case you're interested in connecting with her, seeing what her company has to offer, and seeing if there's some services that you might be able to leverage to help you maximize your commercialization market strategy. I also encourage you to check out impetusdigital.com. If you're interested in this dialogue, or even leveraging some of the methodology that Dr. Mooney has suggested here, which is ongoing longitudinal conversations with stakeholders, allied healthcare providers, payers, patients, physicians, etc., getting them to co-create, consulting with them, building on not only your brand strategies and tactics, but also on the development and even on these so-called pilots, and then being able to execute and to examine and to evaluate. So this is the process that we use using our asynchronous and synchronous collaboration tools, doing it very efficiently and very cost effectively. Please like this video and share it with friends, or subscribe. This is how other people will find our content. We really appreciate your time. Thank you as well, Dr. Roxie Mooney. It has been an absolute pleasure, and wishing everybody a wonderful day ahead.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.